Well, if you didn't get my report yesterday, I reported that President Obama was in Northern Ireland for the G8 summit, and I had reported that the G8 summit may be moving to the D10. And essentially, what the D10 is 10 democratic nations. Right now, it has been time and again. Russia has stood in the way of many policies, and the latest policy that they've been standing in the way of is Syria. And of course, in the past, it's been Iran, and if not Iran, it's North Korea or whoever it might be. But they've stood in the way of getting things done for many, many years. So the G8, which is made up of mainly democratic countries, except for Russia, may be coming to a close and a thing of the past. It may be morphing into an organization known as the D10. And here's an article coming out of the Moscow Times that very well may sum up what the plans are. It says the G8 members could omit Russia from Syria plans, and this is what the article says: is 7 of the 8 G8 nations may adopt a policy on Syria without Russia if President Vladimir Putin doesn't agree to their proposals, a news report said Tuesday. British Prime Minister David Cameron said at the G8 summit in Northern Ireland that there were differences between Russia and the other member states on the subject of Syria, but that the talks could narrow the divide, USA Today reported. However, Western media sources said that the summit is clarifying what measures Russia is ready to take, and that the other members could collaborate on their own policy if no agreement with Putin could be brokered, Interfax reported. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is an independent, nonpartisan membership organization, think tank, and publisher dedicated to being a source for its members, government officials, business executives, journalists, educators, and students, and such organizations as that, has written, and they basically put this policy together. And here is the working paper on this particular move. In fact, I'll read some of the headlines for it. And in essence, the Council on Foreign Relations is in a nutshell, it is an international institution and global governance program. So they are an institution that is dedicated to the creation of a one world government. And this is what their paper basically says. It's another title is Like-Minded and Capable Democracies, a new framework for advancing a liberal world order. And it was put out in January of 2013. And here's what it states as the introduction. It says, in recent years, enhancing cooperation with major world powers has been an important U.S. policy objective. The consolidation of the Group of 20, the G20, as the world's premier forum for the global economy reflects a common interest among its members in greater economic cooperation. Although they differ on a substantial set of issues, from the role of the state of agricultural subsidies to currency valuation, major powers, including Russia, China, India, and others, have accepted a wide range of norms and practices relating to global trade and finance and have a significant stake in maintaining economic cooperation with the West. When it comes to political and security challenges, however, the situation is qualitatively different. Russia and China are fundamentally opposed to the expansion of many of the liberal norms and principles long championed by the West. Though they have found areas in which to work together, these states often reject U.S.-led efforts to cooperate on issues related to expanding democracy, preventing violence against civilians, and influencing the behavior of outlier regimes. Out of this, at the same time, with their traditions of non-alignment and continuing emphasis on the protection of national sovereignty, rising democracies such as India, Brazil, and South America remain ambivalent about supporting Western initiatives to advance these norms. Given the diverging views of major world powers, achieving consensus at the United Nations and other inclusive institutions on important political and security challenges will be difficult. Instead, the United States will need to look to its like-minded partners for greater cooperation. The United States and its democratic allies in Europe and Asia share a common worldview and possess a preponderance of power that provide tremendous sources of leverage in the international system. But they are missing a crucial element for success, a collective institutional vehicle for strategic collaboration. To fill this void, a new multilateral framework is required. In contrast to a concert of democracies or a global North Atlantic Treaty Organization, such as a framework, to be successful, would need to be limited to a small number of strategically like-minded, and highly capable states. A new Democracy 10 or D10 that includes the United States and its major transatlantic and trans-Pacific partners, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Japan, Australia, and South Korea, as well as the European Union, could offer real potential. By enhancing strategic consultation, policy coordination, and joint crisis response across a range of global challenges, the D10 would constitute a powerful and compelling mechanism to advance a liberal international order. So basically what the plan of the United States and the European Union is to basically put together a team of countries that are like-minded and essentially kick out Russia and China, who has always been a basic problem in trying to get policies that they want to, that are in their best interest, to be passed through. Now, this article is quite long, so I'm going to skip down. It says, deepening political divergence, which is one of the headings. It says, the situation is qualitatively different when it comes to political and security cooperation, where major powers, particularly Russia and China, are at odds with the West over fundamental objectives relating to the expansion of a liberal international order. To be sure, neither Russia nor China is a revisionist power, and neither is seeking to undermine the Westphalian system, I guess that's how you pronounce it, of state sovereignty or reorganize global institutions in which they have privileged status. They have collaborated with Western powers to address threats emanating from non-state actors, including terrorism, piracy, drugs, and organized crime, while supporting multilateral initiatives to secure loose nuclear materials and establish UN peacekeeping missions to mitigate conflicts in fragile states, particularly in Africa. Russia has also assisted at times with U.S. efforts in Afghanistan, recently allowing NATO, for example, to access a military base on its territory for resupplyment. However, Russia and China remain fundamentally opposed to the expansion of many of the liberal norms and principles long championed by the West, particularly when they require involvement in the internal affairs of other states. Concerned about the legitimacy of their own autocratic regimes, Russia and China have sought to counter what they view as a West or U.S.-led effort to constrain their influence and reshape the global environment at their expense. These diverging perspectives are evident in at least four major policy areas. 1, the expansion of democracy. 2, the prevention of violence against civilians. 3, the treatment of rogue regimes. 4, and finally, the establishment of privileged spheres of influence. First, Russia and China have sought to frustrate U.S. attempts to expand democracy, particularly in countries ruled by an anti-Western regime. At the United Nations, for example, Russia and China jointly vetoed Security Council resolutions calling for democratic change in Myanmar and imposing sanctions against the government of Zimbabwe for orchestrating political violence. More recently, Russia and China voted against a UN General Assembly resolution to condemn North Korea and Iran for human rights violations. Russia has sought to reverse the democratic color revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and other former Soviet states by bolstering pro-Kremlin politicians, and has joined China in criticizing Western attempts to promote democracy from Syria to Belarus. Second, Russia and China have rejected Western efforts to intervene against governments perpetrating violence against their own civilians. Despite vague statements of support for the responsibility to protect doctrine, both countries have vehemently defended the sanctity of national sovereignty against any outside interference, even where governments are engaged in wide-scale violence against civilians. They threaten to veto U.S.-backed Security Council resolutions that would have authorized the use of force in Kosovo and imposed sanctions against Sudan for mass atrocities. More recently, after abstaining on a UN Security Council resolution authorizing all necessary means to protect civilians in Libya, Russia and China harshly condemned NATO's military action to help remove Muammar Gaddafi from power. And of course, Russia, China, and the West have been at odds as far as Syria is concerned as well. Thirdly, Russia and China have opposed Western efforts to isolate regimes that have violated accepted norms of international behavior. With regard to Iran and North Korea, for example, though they have supported UN Security Council resolutions to persuade the two countries to abandon their nuclear programs, Russia and China have continually sought to water down the scale and scope of economic and military sanctions. So to make a long story short, Russia, China, and the like have continuously been a thorn in the side of the West to try to get things done in regards to Iran, particularly Syria and North Korea, and other smaller issues as well. So because of these divergences between the two sects, this is where it's beginning to look like the 10-nation kingdom that will be ruled by the Antichrist. In fact, here it is under the heading of like-minded alternative. Given the diverging views of major world powers, cooperation at the United Nations and other inclusive institutions on important global challenges will be difficult to achieve. Though such cooperation would be advantageous, its absence is not a prerequisite to achieve multilateral action. By working closely with its long-standing allies, both European and Asian, the United States has demonstrated that it can act assertively across the range of issues, from promoting democracy and human rights to preventing terrorism and nuclear proliferation. These allies share a like-minded world view and possess a preponderance of power that has given them tremendous leverage in advancing the norms of a liberal world order. But they are missing a crucial element for success: a collective institutional vehicle for strategic cooperation. For more than 60 years, the United States and Europe have embraced a common world view that has encouraged policy convergence on major strategic challenges. This world view is built on shared concepts of universal human rights, the rule of law, market economics, and a values-based international order. The basic strategic preferences of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and other European allies are largely aligned with those of the United States, both in terms of how they diagnose threats and challenges and how they believe they should be addressed. In addition to shared values, the United States and its Western allies have maintained a preponderance of power in the international system. With all the focus on rising powers, one might overlook the fact that the United States remains the world's leading economic power and is expected to remain so for another 2 decades. So I don't see the United States going anywhere. Like I said, I know a lot of people think that the U.S. is going to implode and they're going to become a third world nation when the rapture takes place, but I simply don't see that being the case. As I've said many times, even if they lose 1/4 of their population, that would take them from 300 million to 225 million, which basically was the population of the mid-1990s. That's not going to plunge the United States into a third world power. And the bottom line is when the rapture takes place, the nuclear weapons that we possess and the technology that we possess will still be here on Earth. We'll still be considered, the United States will still be considered the world's leading superpower. In combination with the EU, the transatlantic partnership has a combined GDP of $33 trillion and together provide nearly 80% of official developmental aid worldwide. In the security realm, the Western power is even more pronounced. The United States and its closest allies dwarf other major powers on defense spending, and with more than 6 times the resources committed annually than Russia and China combined. Now, I know a lot of people believe that Russia and China are rising powers, but that right there tells you exactly what the real story is. Now, that's not to say that Russia and China are not formidable opponents. Let's face it, Russia has a massive nuclear weapons program, and so does China. And also, China is still an up-and-coming and surging economic force. But even as it deals with mounting physical challenges, no other country will match the United States' combination of wealth, size, technology, or technological capability, and productivity in the foreseeable future. And scholar Joseph S. Nye Jr. puts it this way. He says, military power is largely unipolar, and the United States is likely to retain primacy for quite some time. This military and economic superiority provides the United States and its like-minded allies with a tremendous source of leverage and freedom of action in addressing global challenges. With this preponderance of power, the West has demonstrated that when it comes together in a strategic and focused way, it can act efficiently or effectively to advance liberal norms. Now, this basically, I've given you a synopsis of this article and a few other articles that were also linked to it. But the bottom line is that this looks very much like what the future 10-nation kingdom of the Antichrist will look like once the rapture of the church takes place. And basically, it puts all the players who should be on one side and on the other side in that perspective order. And it allows for a scenario that I believe will take place, and that is when peace does come, that the nations of Russia and China and a few other Islamic nations will come down upon Israel, and that's when God will supernaturally destroy them right after the tribulation period begins and the peace has been signed. That's why it says in Ezekiel 38 that Israel will be living in peace and safety. And, of course, many will add, well, it's also going to be in unwalled cities. Well, they are living in unwalled cities. If you can point to a city that's walled right now and protected by walls, you give me an email, but there are none. Now, yes, they do have, I believe, 25 miles of the 500-plus miles of fencing that separates Israel from the West Bank, but that's not a walled city. So the only thing Israel is lacking right now is living in peace and safety, in my opinion. But, has it ever occurred to anyone that why Israel does survive the apocalypse, does survive Ezekiel 38 and 39? But at the midway point of the tribulation period, they are then subdued. And basically, the Christian Jews are run out of Jerusalem and are sent to Petra to be protected by God. Well, here's the scenario that I see. I see that this D10 being the kingdom of the Antichrist. They'll probably, as the Bible does say, they will elect somebody and give them their power to rule. And once, like I said, this peace does take place, shortly after that, Russia will bring an army down against Israel, and they will be destroyed. This war will not only be with Israel, but I believe it's going to expand into what is described in Revelation chapter 6, starting with verse 3, I believe it is, through 8, which is known as the apocalypse, where 1/4 of the world's population is destroyed. Well, once that takes place, the West and the kingdom of the 10 nations of the Antichrist will be reigning supreme along with Israel. Well, Israel will think that things are just going along just great and fine and all until the ruler of the 10 kings turns his back upon Israel, declares himself to be God, and sets up a one-world government. Now, the Bible says in Daniel that when this does take place, that 3 of the kingdoms will rebel against the Antichrist, and he will have to subdue them. Well, I can easily see that taking place with possibly Germany, with the UK, or whoever the case may be. It might even be the United States that has to be subdued, but I don't see that being the case. But he will subdue 3 nations. That's what the Bible does specifically say. And after he subdues those 3 nations, then he will reign supreme, and he will declare himself to be God. Now I'm going to leave a link to the Council on Foreign Relations working paper entitled "Like-Minded and Capable Democracies: A Framework for Advancing a Liberal World Order" in my description, so that you can read it for yourself. It's about 20 to 25 pages long, so it will take you a little while to get it done. But the bottom line is that this, I believe, could very well be the framework for creating the New World Order and creating the 10 nations that will lend their power to the Antichrist. It's eerily similar to what the Bible has to say will take place in the last days once the Antichrist rules. And this is setting that up for the framework to take place. And you know what? We don't know who's going to lead that yet. So that's why I believe that possibly the rapture of the church will take place first. Then once that takes place, then this new democracy, D10, will come into fruition and will lend their power to a leader. And it's all in the name of global cooperation and to get things done outside of Russia and China, to bypass them, because these nations basically want to see things happen in Syria, in Iran, and in North Korea. And it seems like these 2 nations, Russia and China, seem to be standing in the way on a regular basis. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out and how things continue to move forward as we progress to the end, through the end times. And as always, if you don't know the Lord, you need to. Today is the day of salvation. If you've not accepted Him as Savior, you better make that quick, because I can see right now that the world is quickly coming to a close as far as the world, the man's world, and the tribulation period is seemingly about to take place. And following that, then that's when the Lord will come back and rule for 1,000 years. But before that, you could die. And if you die without Christ, where would you be? Well, if you don't know Jesus as Savior, you're going to be in an eternal place called hell. And I would hate to see that be your final destination, because once you get there, there's no getting out. And the only thing you have to look forward to after that is judgment and eternal damnation in the lake of fire. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.